get started here, we just want to go over the Zoom controls for you. So as you are an attendee, the chat function is turned off, but we do have a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Please submit your questions through there as Shannon presents and gives us lots of great Bison information. And if you'd like to see her slides or her picture better, feel free to look at the view button at the top right of your screen, and you can go through speaker or gallery settings to see what works best for your screen. And if you have any other problems, please feel free to email us at openspace@broomfield.org. And thank you so much. I'm going to introduce all of the members that you're seeing on the screen. So, as I said, my name is Michaela Nelson. We also have Tara Lenahan on call. She is the Broomfield Open Space Foundation Vice President. We have Kristen Pritz, who's the Open Space and Trails Director. And we have James, who's helping us with IT, and of course, Shannon. But I will go ahead and toss that over to Tara to introduce her, our speaker today.
Thank you so much, Michaela, and welcome everyone again. We're so glad you're here. As Michaela said, I'm Tara Lenahan, and I am with the Broomfield Open Space Foundation, and we partner with and support the Open Space and Trails Department here in Broomfield. Our mission for the Open Space Foundation is to protect, enhance, and promote Broomfield's open spaces, trails, and ecosystems so people can experience diverse natural places today and in the future. And we are very happy to bring you tonight Shannon Dennison. Shannon is the Director of Mountain Parks and Wildlife for the city of Denver and has worked for Denver Parks and Recreation for 8 years. Denver Mountain Park System was established in 1912 and is comprised of 45 parks and conservation areas outside of Denver's municipal boundary, including the highest elevation municipal park in the nation, the world-famous Red Rocks Park and Amphitheater, and 2 conservation bison herds that have protected vulnerable American bison for over a century. Shannon spent most of her career with the National Park Service before taking on her current role as the Director of Denver Mountain Parks. Her leadership roles in national and local parks management have provided her with interdisciplinary experience in a wide range of park operations and resource stewardship. Shannon holds a BA in Anthropology and Native American Studies from the University of Montana and a Master's in Historic Preservation from the University of York in the UK. And with that, Shannon, I will hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so. Oh, of course. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. It's very much a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. I will make a couple of apologies up front. One is that there has been a cold going around and it hit me as well as a bunch of our teams. So you'll have to excuse me if I have to take a pause every now and then. And then I also have a house full of dogs and children. So my apologies in advance if you hear any of them scurrying around in the background. And with that, I will take just a moment to share my screen. All right, here we go. So we will get started. Thank you very much again. I'm from Denver Mountain Parks. The Denver Mountain Parks is a pretty special system. A lot of people don't actually know it's here, and I was one of those. I grew up and was born and raised in the city and county of Denver. I'm actually a 3rd-generation city and county of Denver employee, graduated from Denver Public Schools and didn't even know that the Denver Mountain Parks existed until I was an adult and was hired to work for the Denver Mountain Parks. It's an incredible system. As mentioned, we have some really cool things that you might recognize, like Red Rocks, Summit Lake Park on the upper right, Chief Hosa Lodge in the Genesee area, and of course, our amazing bison herds that we're here to talk about tonight. From a technological standpoint, I'm going to be trying to manage 2 different computers at the same time because Zoom doesn't always like to play nice, and I'm going to have my notes on another computer. One of the amazing things about the Denver Park System, our park system is mostly comprised of Denver Mountain Parks. We manage approximately 22,000 acres between our Denver urban and mountain parks. And of that, about 7,000 acres is urban parks, and the rest is entirely mountain parks. So we make up the vast majority of our entire park system. This is a map of our Denver Mountain Park system. We have 45 parks and conservation areas spread across 5 different counties, including Clear Creek County, Douglas County, Gilpin County, Jefferson County, and Grand County as well. The park in Grand County is actually Winter Park. City and County of Denver and Denver Mountain Parks established the ski resort at Winter Park. This is something that I find to be pretty amazing. As mentioned, I started my career with the National Park Service, and I think it's absolutely amazing that Denver Mountain Parks was established 4 years before the National Park Service. Now, there were individual national parks that existed, including Yellowstone National Park, but the organization as a whole wasn't established until 1916 with the establishment of the National Park Service Organic Act. And Denver was well ahead of the times when it came to parks management and land conservation, establishing Denver Mountain Parks in 1912. A lot of people have asked why Denver even has a mountain park system. Well, it's an interesting story. Denver is considered the Queen City of the Plains, but a lot of people at that time in the early 1900s would travel to Denver expecting to be in the mountains, and then they would arrive in Denver and find themselves in the middle of the prairie. Denver wanted a couple of things: to be a gateway city to the mountains and also to provide mountain access to the residents of Denver. Mayor Spear hired a very famous landscape architecture firm to come out and design an entire mountain park system and propose it to the city. And that's what occurred. This is an amazing little map that was created that shows one of the initial loops for the Denver Mountain Park system. And I love this in the upper right. What is it worth? It will bring happiness to our citizens. It will bring thousands of tourists, and it will add millions to Denver values. And I think that it really has. The Denver Mountain Park system was designed around the budding industry of auto touring. In the first report in 1912, they recommended acquiring large parcels of land to protect the scenery, the construction of an interconnecting system of roadways, and the development of facilities for active and passive use, like picnic areas, well houses, so that people could fill their radiators with water as they were required to do, and interesting viewpoints along the way. The system was originally proposed to be about 41,000 acres of land, and then the actual size ended up being about 14,000 acres. So that's a little bit of a background on the Denver Mountain Park system, but we are here to talk about buffalo. Or are we talking about bison? Well, it's a little bit of both. They can be called both. The scientific name is bison. Technically, it is actually bison, bison, bison. But they are colloquially also known as buffalo. A lot of the native community prefer to refer to them as buffalo. I grew up referring to them as buffalo. Sometimes we call it buffalo meat versus bison meat. And so they can be used interchangeably. I give an example of rabbits. Is it a bunny or is it a rabbit? Well, it's both, depending on who you are and who you might be talking to. On the left is the American bison, and on the right is a water buffalo, which is a scientific buffalo. Denver Mountain Parks maintains 2 bison herds, one at Genesee Park in Jefferson County and the other at Daniels Park in Douglas County. Each herd includes 3 bulls, around 23 cows, and generally around 20 calves, depending on the season. This year, we actually had 3 very late calves at our Daniels Park herd that were born between Thanksgiving and Christmas, which is very late. There are 2 different varieties of bison. There is the plains bison on the left and the woods bison on the right. They look fairly similar, but we have plains bison here in Colorado in the Denver Mountain Parks herd, and that's what it would have traditionally ranged in this area. Plains bison were across the United States, and the woods bison go all the way up into Canada and into Alaska. It's a little bit deceiving in this photo, but woods bison are actually larger than plains bison, but they don't have that really distinctive hump that the plains bison has and the long woolly beard that so many of us have come to associate with American bison. There's also this interesting looking creature, which is the European bison. It's the 3rd species of bison that still survives. I was an adult when I realized that these animals hadn't gone extinct. They still survive in pockets, mostly managed for conservation purposes like American bison. But I grew up seeing these amazing cave drawings of bison and always thought that they were a little bit cartoonish, and was amazed when I grew up and realized that those animals still exist. And they actually really look a lot like the cave paintings. So amazing connection there. Bison are the largest land mammals in North America. They can be up to about 6.5 feet tall at the shoulder, which is pretty high up there, and weigh as much as 2,000 pounds. And that doesn't sound all that impressive until you're standing next to one or one tries to stick his head in the window of your truck. They are massive and incredibly impressive. Cows are usually about half the size or half the weight, and yearlings are usually around 400 to 600 pounds. They are incredibly agile and much, much faster than you might think. They can jump a 6-foot fence easily, and we've seen them try to climb even larger fences than that and clear gates with incredible grace. There were once 30 to 60 million bison on the North American landscape, and I think this map is really telling to show how the herd shrunk over time. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the descriptions of there being so many bison on the prairie that it looked like an entire sea of buffalo, a sea of black fur and horns on the American plains. I love this image on the left of called the herd from 1860. And in the map, you can see how the population shrunk over time and the range shrunk over time until there were only a few very, very small pockets of bison left. And this happened over a very short period of time, over only about 20 years or so. The near extinction of bison was a perfect storm of events, policies, and industry that decimated almost the entire population by 1889. And this is one of the most famous pictures that represents the near extinction of the bison. And this photo has been estimated to contain 180,000 skulls just in this one pile alone. The population plummeted down to just 456 known animals by 1889, with only 25 wild bison left at Yellowstone National Park. So of that 456 known animals, most of those ran captivity and 25 were left in the wild in Yellowstone, which continues to amaze me every time I see that fact. And I often get questioned about what exactly happened. Were they overhunted? Were there policies in place? And the answer to that is that, yes, there were a lot of different factors that contributed. No one factor caused the near extinction of the animals, but there were a lot of them that played into it. So we'll go over those. The first was the Industrial Revolution. This was a time when manufacturing was really getting started in the United States. There was heavy machinery and factories, especially in the eastern United States. But this was also before rubber was invented and before we had rubber belts to run the machinery. Cattle leather was typically used for this, especially in Europe, but it's much thinner and weaker than bison leather. And so bison leather was highly prized for these belts to run the mechanical systems because it really outlasted cow leather. Another reason, of course, oopsies, hang on, lost my notes here. There were official and unofficial policies of the US Army, and removal of bison was used as a tool of genocide. There was a lot of contradiction within the ranks of the US Army and the US government. There were policies in place that directed the Army not to remove bison and not to target bison, but there were a lot of ways that they circumvented that and used it as a tool of genocide anyway. So the Army often would work with private hunters to go in and remove bison as a tool of war. Railroads were also another factor in the removal of bison from the landscape and the decimation of the population. Railroad barons had a lot of money at stake, and you can imagine that if you sent crews out into the middle of the prairie to build railroad tracks, it's not something that you could easily go back and fix again if something happened to it. There was a huge amount of money on the line, and a herd of buffalo could run over railroad tracks and destroy them in an instant. And so railroad barons and railroad companies had a major interest in removing buffalo from the landscape in preservation and protection of the railroad system, which was the greater value in their mind. And then finally, cattle. There was significant interest in developing the Great Plains as ranches and farms. Cattle introduced disease, and as farmers and ranchers moved in, it decreased the available forage and the available space for bison. This was probably the smallest factor, but it definitely contributed. Eventually, when the buffalo were gone and there were none left to hunt, people turned towards collecting their bones from the prairie and shipping them back east to be burned for fertilizer. This photo is from Alberta, Canada. And when they had exhausted every other avenue to exploit the bison, for profit and for other means. They sent the bones and burned them, and there was almost nothing left of them on the landscape. Records of the last bison in Colorado are contradictory, and I'd really like to spend some time digging into the archives to find an exact date and exact information. But according to Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the last 5 of Colorado's wild bison were killed in South Park in 1897 and mounted as museum specimens. Those 5 animals became part of the founding collection at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, which is pretty astounding that their view of preserving bison wasn't to preserve the species, it was to shoot them and stuff them and send them to a museum for preservation instead. Interestingly, as part of the Denver Mountain Park system, I also oversee the Buffalo Bill Museum and Grave. And last fall, we identified that a buffalo that had been on display in our gift shop for many, many decades was actually one of those first 5 bison that was killed in Colorado and sent to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. At some point, records had been lost on this, and it was sent to the Buffalo Bill Museum in the 1950s, moved over to the gift shop sometime thereafter. And the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, some of you may have seen that there was a story a couple of years ago that they were missing buffalo number 4 and couldn't figure out what happened to it. Well, we discovered that we had buffalo number 4, and I'm very proud that she was able to return back to her herd at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science last fall. So that was the last 5 wild buffalo in Colorado. And a year after that, the Denver Zoo pulled together the equivalent of half of their annual operating budget to acquire 6 bison to establish a conservation herd in Denver. The animals were purchased in St. Louis and shipped by rail and wagon to Denver. Only 5 of those animals survived the trip to Denver. They were put in an enclosure in City Park, along with some elk. And you can see some wire there, which doesn't really do a great job of keeping buffalo enclosed. And it also turns out that buffalo don't really like to be in the middle of a city. They don't like to be in a city park. And so they had a lot of issues with buffalo breaking the fence, with people getting too close, excuse me, with buffalo trampling the vegetation. And so in 1914, when the Denver Mountain Parks were acquired, the herd from City Park was moved from Denver Zoo and City Park area to Genesee. And then in 1938, when we acquired property in Douglas County, the herd was expanded to Daniels Park. And we continued to work intermittently with Denver Zoo on herd management until about the 1950s or so. And then Denver Mountain Parks tended to be pretty insular in our management practices for the next 70 years or so. So why does bison conservation matter? Bison are a keystone species, which means that the entire ecological process depends on them. The removal of the bison from the landscape caused a cascade of ecological collapse all across the American prairie. I think that this is a really powerful quote from Lieutenant Colonel Dodge in 1873. It says, "Where there were myriads of buffalo the year before, there were now myriads of carcasses. The air was foul with a sickening stench, and the vast plain, which only a short 12 months before teemed with animal life, was a dead, solitary, putrid desert." Removing the buffalo didn't only impact the buffalo, and it didn't only impact Native people. It impacted prairie dogs, wolves, coyotes, foxes, deer, plants, insects, waterways, everything that brings life to the prairie. This is also really interesting that the removal of the buffalo had catastrophic ecological cascade that impacted even some of my family that was living in eastern Colorado in the early during the Great Depression. Excuse me. And the amazing dust clouds that rolled over the prairie during that period of time. This was because homesteaders pushed into land previously occupied by the Native community, and homesteading and the removal of the buffalo combined to create this ecological catastrophe that we know as the Dust Bowl. Here's some images of homesteaders coming in and plowing up the prairie, which on its surface doesn't really seem like that big of a deal. You're replacing one set of plants with a different set of plants. How could that possibly lead to the Dust Bowl? Well, this is an incredibly powerful graphic, I think. It shows the root system of prairie plants. and it shows how deep some of those roots go. Now I'll call your attention to the very, very far left where you can see Kentucky bluegrass, which is what most of us have in our front lawns. You can see how incredibly tiny that little root system is. And if you look on the right, you can see all the different types of prairie grasses. Now you can imagine that when you pulled up all of that root system, it exposed all of the soil to the wind and to the elements, and it very easily blew away. Prairie grasses and prairie ecosystem has been described as an upside down rainforest, where a traditional rainforest has most of its biomass above ground. Prairie ecosystem has most of its biomass below ground. Here's another incredible image. This shows the difference between prairie grasses and wheat. Along with removing the buffalo and removing native plants, it led to ecological catastrophe. So how do bison shape the ecosystem? Well, in a lot of really amazing ways that I continue to learn about throughout my career. The first is that bison flash graze in incredibly large numbers. So unlike cattle that will just hang around and continue to eat in the same place, bison will move through in herds very quickly, munching as they go, and they leave and don't come back for quite a while. They did some studies at Yellowstone National Park and found that after a bison moved through, it actually encouraged more growth, and it created a second wave of greenery that they could come back and graze on again after the fact. Another type of grazer, such as cattle, would not have that same level of impact. Cattle also graze down to the root of plants, and that can kill them over time. Bison tend to not eat down and bite down as low, which leaves more of the plant intact to recover. Their hooves help push native seed into the soil, and amazingly, they can double plant diversity when they're reintroduced to the landscape where they haven't been for a long time. Another way is through their wallows. I absolutely love this photo. The photo on the left is a bison wallow from Haskell County, Kansas in 1897. And on the right is a modern wallow also in Kansas. These buffalo wallows held water in ephemeral pools that helped to support migratory birds as they were flying from Mexico to Canada and back down the other direction. They provided a water source for native wildlife living in the area and a drinking source for themselves as well. Here are some photos of bison wallows also in Kansas. They support a variety of wildlife in the pools as well, and can support like even little aquatic plants and shrimp. This is from Konza Prairie Biological Station in Kansas, and they did an estimate or an evaluation and found that bison wallows are at a frequency of about 1 per acre. So you can imagine on the entire prairie ecosystem having a little pond every acre throughout the entire prairie would have been absolutely amazing. Now I'm going to give you all a trigger warning for the next photo. It does include a carcass. So if you don't want to see that, please go ahead and look elsewhere, and I'll tell you when I change slides. Another incredible way that bison support the ecosystem is through nutrient cycling. It's incredibly important for bison to break down on the landscape and for their carcasses to feed other wildlife like eagles and ravens, coyotes, and a wide range of other animals. On the left is a photo from somewhere in Wyoming, and then on the right is actually a game camera that we set up on a bison at Genesee Park. Denver Zoo set up this camera so that we could record what would happen to the carcass as it deteriorated and what types of animals it fed over time. So in addition to just feeding animals on the landscape, the amount of nitrogen that's released from one buffalo body is significant. Initially, that flush of fluids is toxic to the grasses around it, but within 3 years, the original carcass site is 2 to 3 times as nutrient rich as nearby sites. So you can imagine with 30 to 60 million buffalo dying on the landscape, that would have been an incredible nutrient source for the entire prairie landscape. Here's another one. Looks kind of gross, but I get really excited about bison poop. My kids tease me about this quite a lot, but this is an amazing source of nutrients for the prairie as well. Bison produce a lot of poop and a lot of pee. 30 to 60 million bison create even more poop and even more pee. Bison produce up to 3 gallons of poop per day and many, many gallons of urine. And so I did a quick estimate, and that comes out to about 180 million gallons of poop per day. Now, we've all been playing with AI and it does some good things and some bad things maybe, but I decided to ask it to show me what 180 million gallons of bison poop might look like. So this is what it came up with. This is a little bit of an imaginary image, but what I love about it is that this covers several city blocks, and it helps us to imagine how vast the amount of poop would have been on the landscape every day. So one of these would have appeared on the landscape every single day. And so this is where I get really excited. This is dung beetles. So in order to get all of that poop and all of those nutrients down into the soil, you need an incredibly special little insect. Now, dung beetles might not sound that exciting, but they are actually very, very interesting. In Colorado and the North America, we actually have a variety of scarab beetle called the rainbow scarab dung beetle. And if you think I'm joking about how much I love these, I even wore my scarab dung beetle earrings today for this presentation. These little creatures are amazing. They are bright green and iridescent, and they dig tunnels all around the outside of bison poop, and they bury it. And what that did is it effectively aerated the entire prairie. Those of us with lawns know that you have to aerate it once or twice a year so that air and water can get down into the root system of your grasses. And the exact same was true on a prairie landscape as well, especially with those really, really, really tall root systems. So that was typically done either through prairie dogs or through dung beetles. If there were 30 to 60 million bison, there would have been billions and billions of these little dung beetles. They are incredible. They can go, I forget, I think our scientist at Denver Zoo told me that they can go something like 3 feet underground in their tunnels. They are incredible. We are partnering with Denver Zoo to try to reintroduce these amazing little native dung beetles. They really have a difficult time surviving. They can survive in the poop of other animals. They can survive in cattle dung, but unfortunately, most ranchers today give their animals dewormers, and the dewormer persists in the poop, and it interferes with the beetle's ability to navigate and reproduce. And unfortunately, that really limits their ability to move across the landscape. Denver Zoo, and my friend Tim here on the left is amazing. He's has studied these dung beetles for a while and went out to southeastern Colorado to trap them at the Southern Plains Land Trust. Here he is setting up a little poop trap. You can see the little chandelier there of poop as an attractant. Set that up in the field and waited for the dung beetles to come to the fresh poop, fall in that pitfall trap, and then collect them live and take them back to Denver Zoo in order to breed them. And eventually we'll be able to release them at Daniels Park. The hope is that this will help to restore the grassland and restore the health of the ecosystem. Our soils at both Daniels Park and Genesee Park, because those animals aren't able to migrate naturally, has become heavily compacted and heavily contaminated with non-native grasses. Reintroducing these dung beetles is a really important part of helping to restore those ecological processes. When we're managing for bison, we can't ever just manage for one species. We have to manage for ecological health. And this is my favorite element of how we can do that. So what are the other values of what we're doing and why? I do get a lot of questions about what is the value of this herd? If we're spending money on hay, if we spend a lot of time managing them, why do we do that? And I think one is that it's just really cool to have these amazing animals in our care and to be able to preserve them. But there are other really meaningful values as well. They have high genetic value. The herd was established in 1898 and is genetically important. We have done some initial genetic analysis of our herd and have found that they're most closely related to the Wind Cave herd in South Dakota, and have determined that there is no cattle genetics in our herd. And we're also working with a PhD student at CU Denver who's trying to do a full genetic panel of our bison. I'm not a geneticist, so I can't really speak to that too much, but I'm really excited to hear her results and find out what all she learns about our bison. We already talked a little bit about the ecological value. Bison are a keystone species, and they're really critical to the health of our grasslands and ecological health of our parks. And one of the most important is the cultural value. Bison and Native people are so closely intertwined that separating them has created significant cultural trauma over many decades and centuries. and being able to help Native people reconnect back to their cultural heritage and their cultural patrimony is a really important part of what we do and why. Some of our management changes over the years for our bison herd has been really significant. We used to auction off excess bison. So if you have males and females in a herd, they're going to make baby bison every year. And if we kept all of them, we would very quickly run out of food and the ability to keep them all. And so historically, we would auction off bison on an annual basis. And on the left is a photo of one of those bison auctions. The reason for that is that I work for the city and county of Denver, and most government agencies have processes in place and policies for surplus property. Now, bison are considered property because they're livestock, and the city didn't really differentiate between surplus desks, surplus chairs or computers, and surplus bison. And that meant if chairs and cars and computers had to go to surplus for auction, so did our bison. So we held a livestock auction at Genesee Park once a year and sold off our yearling animals into the ranching community. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Today, we have about 500,000 bison surviving in North America, and the vast majority of those are owned and managed by ranchers who care very deeply about the animals. So ranching is incredibly important to the survival of bison. But as a government agency and a land management organization tasked with conservation, it wasn't a good match for what we're trying to accomplish. And so in 2020, we instead began donating excess bison to tribal herds. This has been one of the most significant things that I've ever had the privilege of doing in my career. As of this year, we've returned 140 bison to tribal governments and non-governmental tribal partners across 6 different states. We also provide a buffalo every year to the Talbot Memorial Council for an annual community field harvest and community feast. When I started this job, we were still auctioning off buffalo, and I felt so uncomfortable every time the animals were picked up and shipped off to ranches, and it didn't quite feel right. And since starting this program, every time we send buffalo back home to be with their people, I get tears in my eyes every time. It is incredibly moving. It is incredibly meaningful to see what these animals mean and how important it is to provide that opportunity to reconnect. We've given animals to tribes that are non-federally recognized as well, which has been something that we can do as a city. And we were able to seed brand new herds for 2 tribes, for the Yuchi tribe and for the Kiowa tribe, both in Oklahoma. For other tribes, the animals we provide supplement their existing herds and provide genetic diversity. And here are a couple more photos of the buffalo going back home with their relatives. Oh, sorry, I forgot to, there's a little bit of a warning for this one as well. On the left is a bison necropsy. One of the amazing things that we're doing also is working with Denver Zoo on science. So in addition to our management changes around how we deal with excess animals, we're also trying hard to incorporate more science into our work. We're a fairly small team, and we don't have a robust team of scientists that are able to do this kind of work. Denver Zoo has an incredible wealth of scientific knowledge and scientists, but not a lot of land in order to practice that. A lot of people don't know that Denver Zoo actually has an entire field conservation team, and their job is strictly to do off-site field conservation work for wildlife rather than caring for animals on site. On the left, Denver Zoo is here helping us with a necropsy for an animal that passed away a couple of years ago. We did not know what happened to her, and it's incredibly important for biosecurity to make sure that if we lose an animal unexpectedly, we know what it is and why that animal died so that we can prevent it from spreading to other animals or being transported to one of our other herds on the tires of pickup trucks. Denver Zoo is also helping us by hosting interns that are funded by the Denver Mountain Parks Foundation to do exclosures, vegetation analysis, and to help us reach our conservation goals overall. I told you about dung beetles. I'm not sure if this video is going to work. The rainbow scarab dung beetle is, of course, the most beautiful dung beetle out there, but it is not the only one. There are 3 different types of dung beetles. There are tunnelers, like the rainbow scarab dung beetle. There are burrowers that live with their entire life cycle within the dung patty. And then there are the rollers, like this little guy right here. And these are the ones that are most famous, that make dung balls and roll them with their back legs and navigate by the stars and the moon. Denver Zoo helped us to do the first reintroduction of native dung beetles anywhere in the world, as far as we're able to tell, at Genesee Park about a year and a half ago. This is a video of that release. That's my hand letting this little beetle go back into the dung. We released about 60 beetles that day. I don't know if this video is going to work. We'll give it a try. And if not, then Michaela has a backup version I'll show you. Go, little beetle. Well, I'm hopeful that all of you were able to see this video. If not, then we'll ask Michaela and we'll come back around to it. There were some more beetles going back in there. This is work that I never expected to get excited about. My background is in anthropology, archaeology, historic preservation, and working with people and thinking about people and cultural history. I had no idea how excited I was going to get about beetles that live in poop and beetles that spend their life. The beetles to me are symbolic of ecological processes that are invisible and how much we lose in our ecosystem when they remain invisible and ignored. My goal is to eventually have a population of beetles that we can send along with bison to tribal herds, so that when we send bison back home to their tribal herds, that we can also send some of these dung beetles back along with them. Relatives and animal relatives come in a lot of different forms, and they are all just as important. And it looks like I got through this quite a lot faster than I expected. I apologize for talking so fast. I get really excited about this. But I'd like to end with a screen showing the Denver Mountain Parks Foundation and their drive to try to create a Denver Mountain Parks license plate. And I'm going to plug this. We need 3,000 signatures as a petition just to get the state to consider this. If you're interested, I would love to have you sign our petition so that we can get this. And my secret is that I actually just really, really want this license plate on my car because I think it is amazing. This would be the only bison license plate available in Colorado, and I would love for it to be associated with Denver Mountain Parks. If you are a registered vehicle owner and a licensed driver in the state of Colorado and wouldn't mind sending our petition, I would be eternally grateful. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Again, I'm sorry that I ended up going through that pretty quickly.
Shannon, that was fabulous. And we did see the beetle.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yes,
I'm glad you could
that was
see
so
him
exciting.
scurrying around.
Yeah, that was great. Well, we already have a question coming in, and other people feel free to hop in and ask your questions. You couldn't tell, but I laughed several times during your presentation. So thank you. So we have a question. How does the loss of bison affect prairie dogs?
That is very interesting. So prairie dogs rely on grasses, and those grasses require nutrients to grow. And so removing bison from the ecosystem reduces the amount of available forage and grasses for prairie dogs to eat. It also creates a lot of competition in areas where we do reintroduce bison and prairie dogs, and that tends to be a bigger source of conflict. We have a big problem with this at Daniels Park. They both like to do the same thing, which is to graze on grasses and hang out. And so it can be very difficult to find the right balance of both of them. So I don't know a huge amount of the impact on a population scale and a landscape scale of the removal of bison on prairie dogs, but I do have a really interesting story that I heard from a native friend in Oklahoma. They had a wildfire that swept through, and the bison instinctively walked over to the prairie dog colony because it had been mowed down so far that they knew that it wouldn't carry fire across the landscape. And so that's where the bison gathered on the landscape. So I don't know quite as much about the impact of the removal of buffalo on prairie dogs, but I know that they are incredibly intertwined and very important to each other. And I love prairie dogs.
Thank you, Shannon. That was a great question. So we have a question. It would be, well, it starts with a statement. It would be amazing if there was enough room for a bison herd in Broomfield. What's the minimum amount of space needed to sustain a small herd?
That is an excellent question and a really difficult one to answer. It depends on a lot of factors. It depends on mostly on the grasses and the available forage. And are those grasses entirely native, or are there non-native grasses? Surprisingly, although we don't necessarily want non-native grasses, they tend to be more nutrient dense than native grasses. And so you need less acreage of non-native grasses than you would for non-native grasses. So it depends on the amount of forage and the density of forage and the water exposure, or the amount of rainfall and moisture there as well. So that can vary from site to site. And that's why we're working with Denver Zoo so that they can do some of these plots to better understand the vegetation. We have our buffalo, we have about 25 animals ranging up to about 40 when we have calves on about 1,000 acres of land at Daniels Park. And that is not quite enough. But the land and space isn't the only limiting factor. You also have to have a certain number of animals for a healthy herd and healthy herd dynamics. Bison don't like to be on their own, and they don't like to be in small groups. They like to have a matriarch. They like to have good age distribution. So there has to be enough space, not just for forage, but also for a large enough herd to have healthy herd dynamics. And if in Oklahoma, where there's plenty of grasses and a lot of rainfall, that acreage is going to be very different than someplace like Colorado. But I would say about 1,000 acres is probably the minimum. Acreage is only one piece of it, though. Having a really good fence is also an important part of it. Bison will go right through a fence when they really want to. We always joke that a fence is just a suggestion to a bison. So the infrastructure that goes into it is also really critical. You have to have water, a good year-round source of water. You have to have year-round forage. And you also have to have handling facilities there as well. At both Genesee and Daniels Park, we have corrals, squeeze chutes, and other facilities that allow our veterinarians and our staff to tag the animals and to handle them for safe veterinary care for both human and animals.
Shannon, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm glad we have this time because the questions are coming in. One is maybe we could have Michaela or James reshare the QR code so people can.
Oh, I can do that.
Yeah,
James,
so folks who
maybe we
didn't
can
get
let
it.
James do that in the background if he doesn't mind.
The next question is, what is the difference between the bison in the mountains and the ones in the Rocky Mountain Arsenal?
That's a good question. So they are managed by different governmental entities. So the bison in Genesee and Daniels Park have been there since the early 1900s and are managed by the city and county of Denver. The animals at the Arsenal are managed by the Department of the Interior and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They have only been there since it was decommissioned and reintroduced, maybe 30 years ago? Somebody might know a little bit better than I do. Typically, the Department of the Interior herds don't mix with other herds, although they are trying to change that. The Department of the Interior has a buffalo management strategy, and they're starting to look beyond that for ways to better manage genetic diversity across the population of buffalo as a whole, not just within the Department of the Interior herd. We work with them. We started a Front Range Bison working group for all the organizations in the area that manage bison for conservation purposes, and they're part of that working group. And we were very excited to add a bull from the Arsenal herd to I think it was the Genesee herd a couple of years ago. And so we do work together, but they are managed and owned by different government entities.
Thank you. So the next person said, great presentation. And how often do you rotate the bulls within your herd to maintain genetic diversity? And where do those animals come from?
That is a really great question. Was that dropped by one of my staff members or somebody I know? Because that is just a perfect setup. We used to have 2 bulls at each herd, and we would rotate them through every 5 years. So for the first 5 years, a bull would be a junior bull, and then for his second 5 years, he'd be the senior bull, and we'd bring in a new junior bull. And so it was they would each get 10 years on the property, 5 years as junior, 5 years as senior. We acquired those bulls or borrowed them from a local ranch in Wyoming and acquired them from private ranches. And we didn't always know the genetic background and history of those animals. Our staff would pick them out based on consultation with the rancher and going out and looking at them and saying, yes, that's a beautiful bull. We'd like to have that one. So the animal would come in as an adult, stay for 10 years, and then go back and most likely be butchered and put into the meat processing. We're trying to change that a little bit. to introduce some more natural herd dynamics. So we've started introducing 3 bulls now. So each herd has we don't really break it up, but we have 3 bulls. We have a very young one, a middle-aged bull, and a senior bull. The goal is to introduce a little bit more competition and a little bit more natural behavior. In a natural herd, we'd have about a 50% ratio of males to females. Unfortunately, in the fall, when bulls rut, it is impressive. You can feel the ground shake and they will go right through a fence. Given that the Genesee herd is right on the side of I-70, there's a lot of risk to that. And we don't want to see a whole bunch of rutting bulls go through when cars are trying to drive by. So we have a very careful balance of risk management and healthy herd dynamics. I would love to have more bulls, but we only have the 3. But I think we're doing better than we did. Interestingly, we now source all of our bulls from local conservation herds. We've gotten 2 so far from CSU at Soapstone Prairie and 1 from the Arsenal. And the goal is to allow those senior bulls to age out on site so that they don't get shipped back to a ranch and processed into the meat industry. And this is going to be a little bit of an experiment for us to see what happens and how long it takes for a senior bull to decide to age out of breeding and go off on his own. And then towards the end of life, when they start looking really unhealthy, it's likely that we'll probably allow the native community to harvest it so that it doesn't suffer and starve to death on the landscape.
Great, thank you. We have another question, similar somewhat, of the remaining buffalo, how many are pure?
That is a very difficult question to answer, and purity is also a very culturally loaded word I've learned for buffalo and for bison. Now, the native community has been under harsh criticism for their blood quantum and that they're only eligible to be tribally enrolled if they meet a certain blood quantum. And so they feel very protective of their buffalo relatives and not determining their value based on their blood quantum and how much of their blood is buffalo versus how much is cattle. That being said, the genetic analysis we've done has shown that there are no cattle genes in the buffalo that we have. There have been some interesting studies that came out that said, well, actually, there are no pure buffalo left. All of them have some cattle genes in them, and that there aren't any more pure buffalo. But then yet another study came out and said, well, that might be right, but that genetic marker is from their shared ancestor, millions and millions of years ago. And so that cattle gene that we're seeing is actually natural in the bison and reflects that shared ancestor, not cattle intergression. So our buffalo, as far as we know, don't have any cattle genetics, but the science is ever evolving.
So fascinating. I don't see any other questions. Oh, yeah, one just popped up. If a bull from the Arsenal impregnates a cow from the mountain herd, are they a different breed of bison?
They are not. They are all plains bison.
These are good questions. Okay.
Interestingly, buffalo from the Arsenal herd, though, because it is a Superfund site, you have to agree that that animal will not be used for consumption. So that bull can never actually be harvested by the native community for food because there is potential contamination, but their offspring are safe to eat.
That's interesting. Okay, we have a couple more questions.
Sure, keep them rolling.
Yeah, given bison are agile and large, what is the best enclosure fence to keep them contained?
That's an interesting question. We're doing some, it varies. So we have 10-foot wire fences, and it depends a lot on what that buffalo and what that bison is used to. So our bison respect our fences the majority of the time because they grew up and have lived their life within those enclosures, and so they don't test the fences. If we were to introduce a new buffalo or into a new enclosure, we don't know exactly how they might treat their fences because it's something new to them. We're about to learn that, actually. We are partnering with the Highlands Ranch Backcountry Wilderness area next to Daniels Park in Douglas County, and we'll be opening about 160 acres of their land to bison grazing for the first time in over 150 years. We're working with Denver Zoo and received a grant through GOCO to construct fencing. and introduce the bison. We're not quite sure how they're going to respond to that fence. It's a lower fence there. It's not the standard 10-foot fence for a couple of reasons. It's not right next to the road, and we also want it to be a little bit more wildlife friendly. So we've built in some gates that allow passage of bears that we can leave open when the bison aren't in that area. Top gates we can swing open for elk migration, but the fence itself is only about 6 feet tall, and we don't quite know how they're going to act. So we're all a little bit nervous about how that's going to go. But those fences at the Soapstone Prairie, northwest of Fort Collins, are only about 4 to 6 feet tall, and seems to work very well for them. So I would say that it depends a lot on the behavior and expectations of that particular herd.
Thank you. Our next question is, how do you see the recent CPW change with bison status being not livestock affecting how people, including ranchers, view bison and their conservation? I'm so glad this got asked.
That's great. I was really hoping somebody was going to ask that question. If they didn't, I was going to talk about it anyway. This is something that was really exciting, but also really fraught with a lot of questions about what does this mean for bison? What does it mean for the ranching community? And I can give you a little bit of a background. The reason that this came up initially was because there's a herd of buffalo in Utah. It's called the Book Cliffs herd, and they are considered wildlife herd, free roaming in Utah. But as soon as they cross over the state line into Colorado, they all of a sudden become legally classified as trespass livestock, and ranchers would shoot them and kill them for meat because they could. It was legal, and there was nothing stopping them from doing that. But also because there's definitely a fear of the spread of brucellosis. Brucellosis is a bacterium that affects pregnant cows and causes miscarriage, and it can be catastrophic both to bison herds and to cattle herds. And so ranchers are very nervous about brucellosis. And if I was a rancher with my livelihood depending on it, I would be too. Elk tend to spread brucellosis more than bison do. And so there's a lot of controversy about where the real risk is. Anyway, that's why it was introduced, was to help protect the Book Cliffs herd. But then there were a lot of questions about what does this mean for other buffalo in the state of Colorado? The goal was to give bison dual classification in Colorado so that free roaming bison would be considered wildlife, and ranched bison would be considered livestock. But there was this gray area in the middle, and we worked with CPW to try to figure out what that language would be of all these conservation bison herds that we have. There's ours, the Southern Plain Lands Trust, Soapstone Prairie, the Arsenal herd, the Zapata Ranch, all these other amazing buffalo herds that are managed for conservation purposes. So we asked, well, would these bison be livestock or would they be wildlife? And I had a conversation with CPW. The interesting thing is that if our bison were classified as livestock, if our bison were classified as wildlife, then they would automatically become the property and fall under the management purview of Colorado Parks and Wildlife immediately. Colorado Parks and Wildlife doesn't have the capacity to be managing herds the way we do behind fences and handling squeeze chutes. And so the balance was struck that any bison behind a fence and kept in captivity, whether for conservation or ranching purposes, would be livestock, and all others are wildlife. Philosophically, I would love for our buffalo and our bison to be considered wildlife. I think that that's a status that they deserve. But functionally, it would prohibit us from being able to ship animals across state lines in the same way. Because we give animals to herds and to tribes in other states. They have health certificates and tags that they travel with. And I don't know what all the state laws are around importing wild bison, and it would very likely limit what we could do. And so this was the right balance for now. I don't know a lot about how ranchers feel about that, at least in this area. We don't have a lot of cattle ranchers in our immediate vicinity. But I know that it's been very controversial in Montana for a lot of reasons. And there are a lot of organizations that are trying to bridge that gap.
Great. It is complicated. The next question is, are there any federal support programs or federal herds in Colorado?
Yes, there are 2 federal herds that I know of, and that is the Arsenal herd, owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Zapata herd, which I actually don't know if it's a federal herd or if it is a nonprofit herd. It's
I think it's
managed by the
PNC.
It's a nature conservancy, but I don't know if the animals are owned by the federal government or if they're just managed by the Nature Conservancy, but I believe they're owned by the Nature Conservancy and they're run on federal land at Great Sand Dunes. So as far as I know, there's only one, maybe two. There are a couple of tribal herds. The Navajo Nation manages a herd near West Cliff, Colorado, on a property that they own. And then I believe it's the Southern Ute has a small herd as well. And then if anybody else knows of any other federal herds, I would love to hear about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you know what is the size of the herd in Yellowstone?
That's a great question. I do not know right now. I should look that up though. I'm going to write myself a little note. I did work in that area. I worked at Grand Teton National Park, and so I got to see that herd up close and personal, and it was an absolutely amazing experience. And had several occasions where I had to stop my car because the buffalo were right in the middle of the road and not moving. So I don't know exactly how large that herd is, but it is expansive.
Thank you. Well, someone wrote in, someone who's a participant right now said that their great grandpa was the superintendent of Denver Mountain Parks.
Oh, who I would love to know who
Their
that
name
might
is
be.
Alex.
Oh,
So yes, so that's
I know the
great.
names of most of the superintendents of Denver Mountain Parks, and there haven't been that many of us. So that's very exciting, and that makes me very, very happy. I've probably encountered some of your great grandfather's signatures and documents in the archives at Denver Public Library.
Yep, that's great. Well, we are so happy that you have been here, Shannon. I think that we will share a slide here. We want to ask everyone who participated to give us feedback. So after this slide, if you didn't get this slide yet, take that picture. And thank you, Shannon. So on behalf of the Broomfield Open Space Foundation, we want to recognize your contribution in being with us tonight and teaching us all about the herd of bison at Denver Mountain Parks. And on your behalf, we would like to send a donation to Denver Mountain Parks Foundation, who is helping fund the internships that support the bison management program. So thank you, Shannon.
Thank you so much.
We're so glad you've been here, and yeah, sign the petition for the bison license plate. And here is a QR code. If people are here, if they would please, take your camera out and take a picture of this and give us feedback on our speaker series. We want to know, what you think. And I also want to remind everyone that this will be recorded and uploaded onto the city's Open Space and Trails website. So, invite people to come and watch this. It was so informational. Thank you. And I think we'll show a slide with our next speaker, next month's speaker. This is Shannon Herskovich, and she is a lepidopterist at the Butterfly Pavilion. And she's going to be talking about monarch conservation in Mexico. And so we invite you to join us on March 12th for that. And with that, we will say good night to everybody. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.